What happens when a millionaire CEO meets a plain bridesmaid at a lavish wedding? What if everything he thought he knew about love, redemption, and family was turned upside down by one woman who wasn't afraid to speak the truth? Secrets, betrayal, and a shocking revelation await. But can they overcome their past and build a future together? You won't believe how their story ends. Stay tuned until the end to find out. Los Angeles, with its sun-drenched streets and the shimmering skyline, was the perfect setting for an extravagant wedding. The grand ballroom at the Venice Grand Hotel glittered with opulence, its chandeliers sparkling above a sea of elegantly dressed guests. The clinking of crystal glasses and the hum of light chatter filled the air, a perfect symphony for a celebration of love and wealth. But for Grace Montgomery, standing in the corner of the room, it was a place she felt utterly out of place. As a bridesmaid for her childhood friend Lily, Grace had never imagined herself amidst such glamour. The bright blue dress she wore, though carefully chosen and affordable, seemed to pale in comparison to the extravagant gowns surrounding her. She adjusted her glasses for the umpteenth time, nervously glancing around the room, feeling the weight of self-consciousness settle over her. Grace had always been the ugly bridesmaid. At least that's how she had always felt. In a world that celebrated beauty and wealth, Grace's modest looks and modest lifestyle made her feel invisible. She was the kind of woman who didn't attract attention, who didn't stand out in a crowd. She was content with her quiet life, teaching art at a public school in the city. Yet, there was no denying the sting of feeling overlooked, especially when faced with the polished, perfect faces at Lily's wedding. At the other end of the ballroom stood Harrison Brooks, the man who could not have been more different from Grace. He was the embodiment of everything Grace was not. Tall, imposing, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that likely cost more than she made in a month, Harrison radiated the confidence that came with being a successful entrepreneur. He was used to the life of luxury, to cocktail parties and gala dinners. At 35, he had everything money could buy, except for genuine connections. Harrison had long ago learned to guard his heart. Money, power, business deals. Those were his comfort zone. Harrison had attended the wedding for his younger brother Liam, who had just married his college sweetheart. The event was grand, a spectacle of wealth and opulence. But Harrison found no joy in it. He took another sip from his whiskey glass and looked around the room, his gaze skimming over the well-dressed women who surrounded him. They all had one thing in common. They were interested in him only for what he represented. To them, Harrison was just another trophy, another millionaire to either impress or seduce. It was when he was standing by the bar nursing his drink and thinking of excuses to leave early that he felt a small collision, a soft thud as someone bumped into him. He looked down, surprised to find a woman, her bright blue dress somewhat out of place amidst the sea of high fashion, looking up at him. "I'm so sorry," she muttered, adjusting her glasses. "I didn't see you there." Her voice was warm, apologetic, but laced with the kind of self-consciousness that spoke volumes. She quickly stepped back, her face turning slightly red. Harrison barely had time to take her in before he gave a casual wave, dismissing the moment as yet another awkward interaction. "It's fine," he said curtly, not bothering to look at her more closely as he turned back to his drink. But something about her stayed in his mind. Perhaps it was her lack of concern for his status, her avoidance of the typical small talk that everyone else seemed so eager to engage in. Most women at these events were eager to discuss his business, his wealth, or try to get close to him for some ulterior motive. But this woman, Grace, didn't seem the least bit interested in impressing him. As if she felt his gaze linger, Grace awkwardly cleared her throat. She gave him a small, polite smile, then turned quickly and headed toward the other side of the room. For a moment, Harrison was left staring after her, a slight confusion forming in his mind. She hadn't made any attempt to extend the conversation, hadn't slipped him her number or tried to start a connection. It was almost refreshing. In the world of business deals and endless flattery, her simple honesty felt like a breath of fresh air. He quickly shook off the thought, but as the night wore on, his gaze unconsciously drifted back to her. Grace, standing with a group of bridesmaids, was laughing with friends. Her laughter seemed genuine, untainted by the pressure of perfection that the other women seemed to wear like a second skin. There was a brightness in her eyes that contrasted sharply with the plastic smiles of the other guests. Later in the evening, as the music played and couples swirled across the floor in perfect harmony, Harrison found himself checking his watch for the third time in 15 minutes. The dance floor was a blur of designer gowns and tailored suits, all seemingly moving in time with the rhythm of the night. He was about to turn and make an excuse to leave when he saw her again. Grace standing awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor, her glass of champagne held with both hands, her eyes fixed on the ground. She was out of place here, just like him. "Grace," a voice suddenly said from behind her. Startled, Grace turned around to find none other than Harrison's mother standing with a bright smile. "I'm so glad to see you. My son Harrison," she motioned to the man who had been silently observing her for most of the night, "needs a dance partner. You two should dance." Before Grace could protest, she found herself being gently pushed toward Harrison. He looked as surprised as she felt. "Go ahead, son. Just one dance," his mother urged before moving off to talk to other guests. Grace and Harrison stood there for a moment, both unsure what to do next. Then, with a resigned sigh, Harrison offered her his hand. "Let's get this over with," he said, his tone a little more resigned than he intended. Grace hesitated for a split second before placing her hand in his. "I promise I won't step on your feet too much." They moved toward the dance floor, both aware of the uncomfortable tension between them. As the music slowed, Harrison placed his hand gently on her waist, and she awkwardly adjusted her posture. For a moment, they both swayed, unsure of what to do next. "So," Grace began, trying to break the silence, "how's life in the world of corporate takeovers and million-dollar deals?" Harrison chuckled softly. "It's a bit more glamorous than this, I assure you." Grace tilted her head and smiled. "Well, you could have fooled me. Here you are, stuck in a fancy ballroom, dancing with someone you barely know." She wasn't trying to be funny, but Harrison found himself laughing. "Anyway, fair point," he admitted. "But what about you? You're a bridesmaid at this grand affair, yet you seem like you'd rather be anywhere else." Grace shrugged, her expression softening. "I'd probably rather be grading student artwork right now. This is a little much." Her honesty caught him off guard. It wasn't the typical response he was used to. And as they swayed together, Harrison found himself actually listening to her. Her eyes lit up when she spoke about teaching, about art, about the students she worked with. "I teach art at a public school," Grace continued, the excitement in her voice palpable. "It's not glamorous, but it's something I truly love." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "So, not a fan of the whole glamorous thing?" Grace's smile softened. "Not when it feels like everyone's pretending to be something they're not." It was a bold statement, and for the first time that night, Harrison found himself deeply intrigued. This woman, who seemed to have nothing to gain from him, was offering him the most honest conversation he'd had in ages. As the song came to an end, Grace stepped back, offering a polite smile. "Thanks for the dance," she said, her voice casual but sincere. "I'll leave you to your drink." Before Harrison could respond, she turned and disappeared into the crowd. He stood there staring after her, the faintest of smiles playing on his lips. What was it about her? For the rest of the evening, Harrison found his gaze drifting back to Grace. She was laughing with her friends, helping Lily with her dress, and even dancing with some of the other bridesmaids. But it wasn't her dancing that caught his attention. It was the way she was just herself. No pretensions, no facade, just a woman who had nothing to prove. As the night came to a close and the guests began to leave, Harrison found himself looking for her one last time, but she was already gone. It was probably for the best, he told himself. Yet deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him, all because of a dance that wasn't supposed to happen. The following days after the wedding passed in a blur for both Grace and Harrison, but neither could shake the feeling that something significant had shifted during that one brief encounter. Grace, back in her simple life of teaching art to her public school students, couldn't stop thinking about Harrison Brooks, the wealthy entrepreneur who had looked at her with something other than the usual disinterest that came from being in the same room as a millionaire. Harrison, for his part, found himself wondering about the woman in the blue dress, her bold honesty, her refusal to play by the rules of his world. It was late on a Tuesday afternoon when Grace's phone buzzed, her fingers tapping nervously at the screen when she saw the name at the top of the message. Harrison Brooks. The message was simple. "I really enjoyed our dance at the wedding. Would you be interested in grabbing coffee sometime?" Grace blinked at the phone screen, her heart racing. It felt ridiculous, she thought. Why would someone like Harrison, someone who could have any woman he wanted, want to meet her again? He had no reason to, and yet here he was, reaching out to her. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. Her first instinct was to decline. She didn't belong in his world, didn't want to be another fleeting interest that would eventually fade into oblivion like so many others before her. But something about his message, the sincerity behind it, made her hesitate. The memory of their conversation, the dance that had been anything but ordinary, flickered in her mind. She swallowed her doubts and typed back a quick response. Coffee sounds nice. Saturday 10 a.m. at Cafe Bella. Her thumb hovered over the send button for a moment, and then with a deep breath she pressed it. The morning of their coffee date, Grace was a bundle of nerves. She stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her hair for the third time. She had picked out a simple blouse and jeans, feeling the pressure to appear casual but still somewhat presentable. There was no way she was going to try to dress up to impress him. Harrison had seen her at her most awkward, and that was who she was. La Salle Cafe was a cozy little spot tucked away in the artsy district of Los Angeles, its brick walls covered in paintings by local artists. Grace arrived early as usual and sat by the window, nervously stirring her cup of coffee. She had been hoping for a quiet morning, a chance to think and distract herself from the idea of sitting across from Harrison. But now, the sound of the door opening and closing sent a jolt through her. She looked up to find him, Harrison Brooks, standing in the doorway. He was dressed casually, a far cry from the sharp suits he typically wore. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and there was an air of uncertainty about him that surprised her. He was nothing like the confident businessman she had imagined him to be. "I hope I'm not late," he said, his voice a little more uncertain than usual as he approached her table. "I wasn't sure what kind of coffee you might like, so I figured I'd let you decide." Grace stood and smiled, feeling the tension between them. "No worries, you're right on time," she said, trying to act casual. "You can sit, though." "I don't bite." Harrison chuckled and slid into the chair across from her. There was an awkward silence between them as they both settled into the new dynamic of this conversation, far removed from the wedding, far removed from the pretenses. "So," Grace began, wanting to break the silence, "how's life in the fast lane? Did you find time to get back to your $1 million meetings?" Harrison rolled his eyes with a smirk. "I can't say I'm thrilled to be back in the office," he admitted. "Sometimes I wish I could just walk away from all of it. But it's hard when you're part of something that's always been expected of you." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Expected of you?" "Yeah," Harrison said, his tone light but with an edge of sincerity. "I never really had a choice. Family business, you know. Ever since I was a kid, I was taught that the future was already decided. Take over the company. Do what needs to be done. There wasn't much room for anything else." Grace leaned back, intrigued. She had always imagined that people like Harrison Brooks were driven solely by ambition, by the hunger for more. But here he was, admitting that his path had been laid out for him long before he ever had a say in it. "So what did you want to do before your family handed you this empire?" she asked gently, sensing that there was more beneath the surface. Harrison was quiet for a moment, the weight of her question sinking in. "I used to love architecture," he said, his voice tinged with nostalgia. "I would sketch buildings as a kid, dream of designing spaces that felt alive. But that was never something I could do. It was always about the company, the money, the deals." Grace smiled softly. "I used to dream of becoming an artist, not a teacher," she said, her voice a little wistful. "But I couldn't afford to pursue that dream on my own. So I found a way to make it work. I ended up teaching, helping others discover art when I couldn't find the means to fully embrace it myself." Harrison looked at her surprised. "You never thought about pursuing something else?" Grace shrugged. "Not really. Teaching gives me a sense of purpose. I'm making a difference, even if it's just in small ways. That's enough for me." The conversation flowed from there as they began to peel back the layers of their lives. They spoke about their families, their childhoods, and the ways they were shaped by their circumstances. Grace told Harrison about her Puerto Rican parents, who had worked tirelessly to provide her with the opportunities they never had, and about how she always felt a deep sense of responsibility to give back through her teaching. Harrison, in turn, spoke about his father, a man driven by ambition and wealth, who had always seen Harrison as little more than an heir to his throne. He admitted that he never truly questioned his father's actions until now, until meeting Grace. "I guess I never realized how different life could be," Harrison confessed, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Your life, your world, it's so different from mine. But it's real. And I've never really seen anything real like that." Grace blinked, caught off guard by his words. She had always assumed that men like Harrison were too caught up in their own world to care about people like her. But here he was, acknowledging something that she had always known deep down. that real connections weren't based on wealth or status, but on genuine understanding and shared experiences. "You don't have to pretend with me, Harrison," she said quietly, her voice softening. "You don't have to be someone you're not." He smiled, but this time it wasn't the confident, polished smile that she had seen before. It was real, vulnerable, and perhaps for the first time Harrison felt like he wasn't just a business magnate. He was a man with desires, regrets, and hopes, just like anyone else. The rest of the coffee date was filled with easy conversation as they laughed, shared stories, and grew more comfortable with each other. Grace had no idea what she was getting herself into, but she couldn't deny the pull she felt. There was something about Harrison that intrigued her, something that made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there could be more to their story than a simple coffee date. When it was time to say goodbye, Harrison stood, offering his hand to Grace. "I'll admit I'm surprised," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I didn't expect this to feel so easy." Grace shook his hand, her heart racing. "Me neither," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They exchanged a lingering glance, the unspoken connection between them undeniable. As Grace walked away from the cafe, she felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Something had shifted between them, and while she wasn't sure where it would lead, she knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The days following their coffee date passed in a whirlwind of emotions for both Grace and Harrison. While Grace tried to return to her routine of teaching at the public school, she couldn't shake the memory of their conversation. There was something about Harrison that lingered in her thoughts long after they had parted ways. The way he spoke, so openly about his family, about the constraints placed on him by his own success. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced with men from her world. He wasn't like the others who came from wealth, who never seemed to think twice about their privilege. Harrison seemed conflicted, genuine even. Grace found herself questioning her initial reaction. She had almost dismissed him as just another rich guy with too much time on his hands. But now, after hearing him speak with such honesty, she wasn't sure what to think. Was it possible that this was more than just a passing curiosity? Could someone like Harrison truly understand her life, her struggles, and still be interested in her? She had been burned before by people who saw her as nothing, more than an accessory to their own lives, their own ambitions. But Harrison seemed different. Meanwhile, Harrison sat in his sleek corner office overlooking the Los Angeles skyline, distracted. His assistant had already brought in the acquisition reports for the day, but his mind kept drifting back to Grace. He had expected their coffee date to be a fleeting encounter, something to pass the time. But after their conversation, he realized how much he had underestimated the effect she would have on him. He had never met anyone like Grace before. She wasn't after his money, nor did she care about his status. There was no ulterior motive in her words or actions, and that was something Harrison had longed for. Honesty, simplicity, a connection that didn't come with strings attached. He found himself checking his phone repeatedly, rereading the messages they had exchanged, reflecting on every moment of their time together. Harrison thought back to that day at the cafe, when Grace had spoken so openly about her struggles, about how she had given up her own dreams of being an artist to teach in a public school, a job that barely paid the bills but fulfilled her passion. He admired her for that. It was something he could never have imagined doing, giving up his dreams for the sake of others. But the more Harrison thought about Grace, the more he realized just how much their worlds differed. She was grounded, connected to the community, while he had spent most of his life building a company that, in his heart, he now knew caused harm to the very people Grace cared about. His father's business decisions, which Harrison had always taken for granted, had crushed local businesses, displaced families, and caused untold suffering. Grace's father, he recalled, had been one of the many who had lost everything because of those corporate takeovers. The revelation had struck Harrison like a punch to the gut. The next week, after much contemplation, Harrison found himself standing at the edge of a street he had never really paid attention to. The neighborhood was modest, with small shops lining the streets and murals painted on the walls, celebrating the local Puerto Rican culture. Harrison had driven through this area 1,000 times, but he had never noticed the lives that existed, beyond the facade of wealth and luxury that defined his world. This time, however, he wasn't here to look at buildings or consider future investments. He was here because of Grace. His thoughts were jumbled as he stepped out of the car. He knew he needed to make things right somehow. He needed to confront his family's legacy and what it had cost people like Grace's father, her community, and take responsibility for the past. Harrison had grown up in a bubble. He had always been told that success was measured by how much money you made, how many people worked for you, and how much influence you had. But now, after meeting Grace, he realized there was something far more valuable than money: connection, empathy, accountability. These were the things that truly mattered. He walked down the street, his mind racing as he tried to figure out how to even begin making amends for the damage caused by his family's empire. He had no answers, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't continue living in ignorance. The following weekend, Grace was spending her Saturday afternoon in the art room, grading papers and preparing for the upcoming school week. She was surrounded by student artwork, the walls adorned with paintings, sketches, and sculptures. It was the one place she felt truly at home, where her passion for art could thrive. Her phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced at it, surprised to see an unfamiliar number. Tentatively, she picked it up, her heart beating faster as she read the text. "I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. I found the documents that show my father's company was responsible for what happened to your father's business. I want to make it right. Can we talk?" It was from Harrison. For a moment, Grace stood frozen. The words on the screen sent a wave of mixed emotions rushing through her: anger, disbelief, and yet there was a part of her that was moved by his honesty. She had suspected something like this. Harrison had mentioned his family's legacy in passing during their coffee date, but she had never imagined it was as deep and damaging as this. And yet here he was, taking responsibility. He wasn't just apologizing. He was trying to understand. Grace placed the phone down slowly, feeling a sense of uncertainty. She had every right to be angry, to walk away. But something told her that this was different. This wasn't just another empty apology. It felt sincere. He was trying to do the right thing, even if it meant confronting his own family's mistakes. Later that day, Grace made her decision. She couldn't simply ignore this. She needed to know the truth, and she needed to hear it from him. With a deep breath, she replied, "We can talk, but we need to meet in person." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step toward understanding. And for Grace, that was all she needed for now. Harrison waited anxiously at the cafe, his palms sweaty as he stared out the window, watching the world pass by. It had been days since he'd sent that message, and now he was about to meet Grace. Again, but this time it was different. This wasn't a casual meeting over coffee. This was about confronting the past he had ignored for too long. When Grace walked into the cafe, her expression unreadable, Harrison felt a knot tighten in his stomach. She was more beautiful than he remembered, but it was the hurt in her eyes that made his heart ache. They sat down, and for the first time there was no small talk, no awkward pauses, just the weight of the conversation they needed to have. "I know I can't fix what my family did," Harrison began, his voice heavy with regret. "But I'm here to tell you that I didn't know, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. For you, for your father, for your community." Grace stared at him, her emotions battling inside her. She had every reason to hate him, but here he was, trying to make things right. It was hard to ignore the sincerity in his words, the genuine regret in his eyes. "I don't know what to say," Grace admitted quietly. "You've shattered everything I thought I knew about you, Harrison, about your family, but I see you trying, and that's something." As the days went on, Grace and Harrison's conversations continued. They didn't know where it would lead, but both were willing to try. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just looking at each other as people from different worlds. They were seeing each other as equals, as two people trying to make sense of the past and build a future that was more than just about them. The days after their heartfelt conversation were marked by a new, tentative understanding between Grace and Harrison. Both were wary, but willing to explore the possibility that something meaningful could emerge from the ashes of past mistakes. While Grace tried to focus on her work, helping her students express themselves through art, her thoughts often wandered back to Harrison, to the man who had, in many ways, become the unexpected source of both pain and potential redemption. She had never imagined that a chance encounter at a wedding would lead to this complicated, uncertain path. Harrison, on the other hand, had been taking action, quietly but resolutely. He had been scouring through old documents in his father's files, unearthing the ugly truth about the corporate takeovers and the way Blake Enterprises had destroyed so many lives, including Grace's father's business. Harrison couldn't believe how much harm had been done in the name of profit, and yet his family had always justified it as a necessary evil, a part of growing the business. Now, looking at it through Grace's eyes, it seemed so callous, So unjust. The realization weighed heavily on him. His guilt had become almost unbearable, but he refused to let it define him. He knew that he couldn't change the past, but he could use his resources to help those affected by his father's decisions. He started small, quietly funding community initiatives that would have an impact on the neighborhoods that had suffered the most. Grace had heard whispers about Harrison's efforts, but it was when she received an unexpected text from him that the full scope of his actions came into focus. She had just finished an art class when she saw the message. "I've been working on something. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to see what I'm trying to do. Can we meet tomorrow?" Grace stared at the screen, her mind racing. She hadn't expected Harrison to take this much initiative. He was trying to fix the things his family had destroyed, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. It didn't undo the past, but it was clear that he was sincere. That was something she hadn't been sure of before. She agreed to meet him the next day at the community center, in a part of town she didn't visit often. It was a modest building, tucked away behind a row of small businesses, but it held significance. This was the heart of the neighborhood that had been impacted by her father's loss. A place that had seen better days, but still thrived thanks to people like her mother, who fought tirelessly to keep the community alive. The next afternoon, Grace found herself standing in front of the center. It was a place filled with history, memories of better days, and the promise of change. The door opened as she stepped forward, and there he was, Harrison. He looked slightly out of place in his casual clothes, his usual sharp business persona softened by the humble setting. But what struck her most was the look in his eyes, determination mixed with something deeper, something raw. "Grace," he said, his voice soft but full of meaning. "Thank you for coming." She nodded, her arms crossed, watching him carefully. "What did you want to show me?" He gestured for her to follow him inside, and they walked through the hallway of the community center. It was nothing like the pristine offices or conference rooms Harrison was used to. The walls were lined with artwork from local students, colorful and raw, filled with emotion. It was clear that this place, despite its wear and tear, was a vital part of the community. Harrison led her to the back, where a small office had been set up. On the desk in front of them were architectural plans, detailed drawings of a new project. He spread them out in front of her, his fingers tracing over the designs. "This is what I've been working on," he said, his voice laced with an intensity she had never heard before. "A new community arts center. It's a place for artists to showcase their work, for children to have access to art classes, for the community to have a space to gather and celebrate its culture. It's something I want to build with your help. It's the least I can do." Grace looked down at the plans, her heart racing. The idea of an art center was something she had dreamed of for years, a space where children could explore their creativity, where local artists could thrive. She had always envisioned it, but to see it on paper, to know that someone was actually willing to fund it, made her stomach flutter with disbelief. "You want me to help you with this?" she asked, her voice trembling. Harrison nodded. "I don't just want your help. I need it. I want you to design the space, to make it what the community truly needs. I know I can provide the funding, but I don't understand this world the way you do." Grace stood there stunned. She had never imagined that someone like Harrison, someone who came from the world of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals, would care enough to help her bring her vision to life. But here he was, offering her the chance to create something that could change the lives of so many people. "I don't know what to say," Grace whispered, her emotions rising to the surface. "This is incredible." Harrison stepped closer, his voice earnest. "It's just the beginning. I want to give back. I want to do something that matters, not just to me, but to this community, to you." Grace took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had come to this meeting expecting to feel anger, to feel betrayed, but instead she was overwhelmed by a sense of possibility. Maybe this could be the first step towards something good, something meaningful. Maybe, just maybe, they could build something together, something that transcended the mistakes of the past. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. Grace and Harrison began working together, sketching out ideas for the new art center. They met regularly, and each meeting revealed new layers to their connection. Harrison, once a detached businessman, now seemed genuinely invested in the project, listening intently to Grace's ideas and working alongside her to bring them to life. Grace, in turn, saw him in a new light. She had never imagined that a man like him could be so passionate about something so far removed from his world of power and wealth. They spent hours discussing the details, what kind of space would be needed, what materials to use, and how they could ensure that the center would benefit everyone in the community. There were moments of tension, of course, as they navigated their different backgrounds. But with each passing day, Grace began to see Harrison not just as the millionaire, businessman, but as someone who was truly trying to right the wrongs of his past. He wasn't perfect, but he was willing to change. Harrison too saw something in Grace that he hadn't expected. Her strength, her passion for the arts, and her deep commitment to her students were qualities he had always admired from afar. But now, working side by side, he was beginning to understand just how much she had given up to help others. As the Art Center project began to take shape, so did their relationship. It wasn't a smooth journey. It never was, especially when their worlds were so vastly different. But with each challenge they faced, their bond grew stronger, grounded in mutual respect, understanding, and a shared vision for the future. One afternoon, as they stood outside the nearly completed center, Harrison turned to Grace, his expression serious. "I know this doesn't fix everything," he said, his voice filled with raw sincerity. "But I hope it's a start. A way to show you that I'm not just a Blake. I'm not just the product of my father's mistakes. I'm trying to be better. For you, for the people who matter." Grace looked at him, her heart heavy with emotion. She had struggled with anger, with distrust, but now, standing in front of the building they had created together, she realized something profound. She had seen the worst of him, but now she was seeing the best. "I don't know if I can forgive everything that's happened," she said softly, "but I see you trying, and that means more than anything." Harrison took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Then that's enough for me." As they stood there side by side in front of the center that would soon open its doors to the community, Grace knew that the future was still uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like they were on the same path. Two people who had come from different worlds yet had found a way to build something beautiful together. The grand opening of the Rivera Community Arts Center was just around the corner, and Grace couldn't help but marvel at how much had been accomplished in such a short time. What had started as a hopeful idea had blossomed into a thriving community project, one that had touched the lives of so many people, including her own. She stood outside the center on a warm afternoon, looking up at the building. The modern architecture, coupled with colorful murals that reflected the neighborhood's rich history, made it look like something straight out of a dream. It was more than just a space. It was a symbol of redemption, of change, and of new beginnings. As she walked through the center, Grace could hear the laughter of children in the art workshops, the hum of conversations in the community rooms, and the sound of brushes moving across canvases. It was exactly what she had envisioned, vibrant, alive, and full of potential. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly proud of what they had built, and she knew that none of it would have been possible without Harrison. Harrison had come a long way from the man she had met at that wedding. The once jaded businessman, focused solely on his empire, was now someone who seemed driven by a desire to give back. He had made significant strides within Blake Enterprises, shifting its focus from profit-driven motives to community-driven initiatives. He had used his wealth to fund the Arts Center and other local programs, all in the name of redemption, not just for himself, but for the people whose lives had been shattered by his family's actions. But it wasn't just about money. Harrison had learned something even more valuable from his time with Grace. He had learned to listen, to truly hear people. He had learned that no amount of wealth could replace the fulfillment that came from making a positive impact on others' lives. And through Grace, he had also learned what it meant to love and be loved without expectations or conditions. The evening of the grand opening arrived, and the center was buzzing with excitement. Local artists, families, and even a few corporate sponsors had gathered to celebrate the unveiling of the new space. Grace stood near the entrance, greeting guests and making sure everything ran smoothly. As the doors opened, she saw the sea of people, many of whom had been directly affected by the corporate takeovers of the past. But tonight, none of that mattered. What mattered was the future they were all creating together, a future that was full of promise and possibility. Across the room, Harrison stood, his gaze meeting hers. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, and Grace felt her heart skip a beat. She hadn't expected to see him here at the opening, but of course he had made time for it, just as he had made time for everything else in the last few months. As the CEO of Blake Enterprises, He had attended countless meetings, dealt with the board's demands, and navigated the challenges that came with his position. But none of it seemed to matter to him as much as this night, as much as the people whose lives he was now trying to impact for the better. Harrison walked over to Grace, his face lit with a quiet pride that she had never seen before. "It looks beautiful," he said, his voice filled with admiration as he looked around the room. Grace smiled, her eyes shining. "We did it," she said softly. "It's everything I ever dreamed of." "You did it," Harrison corrected her. "I just provided the resources. You're the one who brought it all to life." Grace shook her head, her expression tender. "We did it together." As they stood there side by side amidst the celebration, Grace couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She had been hesitant to open her heart to Harrison, unsure if it was worth the risk. But now, as they shared this moment, surrounded by the people they had worked so hard to help, Grace realized that she had made the right choice. She had allowed herself to trust him, to see him for who he truly was, not just the wealthy businessman, but the man who was genuinely trying to right the wrongs of his family's past. Later that evening, after the guests had left and the center had settled into a peaceful quiet, Grace and Harrison found themselves standing on the balcony, looking out at the city lights twinkling below them. The air was cool and the soft breeze carried the faint scent of the ocean. It was a peaceful moment, one that seemed to perfectly capture the calm after the storm of emotions that had come before. Harrison stood next to Grace, his hand resting gently on the railing. He didn't need to say much. The silence between them felt comfortable, familiar. It wasn't awkward. It was as if they had finally found a rhythm, a harmony that had eluded them before. "Do you think we've done enough?" Grace asked softly, breaking the silence. "Do you think we've made a real difference?" Harrison looked over at her, his eyes thoughtful. "I think we've made a start," he said. "And sometimes that's all you can do. We can't undo the past, but we can shape the future. And that's what we're doing here. Together." Grace smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never imagined I'd be here doing something like this, but I'm glad I'm doing it with you." "Me too," Harrison replied. He turned to face her fully, his expression sincere. "I don't have all the answers, Grace, but I'm willing to keep trying. I'm willing to build something real with you, whatever that looks like." Grace felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long building walls, so afraid of being hurt again. But now, standing here with Harrison, she felt something shift inside her. She was no longer afraid. She could see a future with him, a future where they both continued to learn, to grow, and to change. Together. "I don't know what's next for us," Grace said quietly, "but I know that whatever it is, I want to face it with you." Harrison took her hand in his grip firm and warm. "I want that too," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "No matter what happens, we'll face it together. That's the only thing that matters." And in that moment, as they stood together on the balcony, Grace realized that they had come a long way. Not just in building the art center, but in building a relationship that was grounded in truth, trust, and love. Their worlds had once seemed so different, so far apart, but now they were learning how to bridge those differences, to create something new, something beautiful that neither of them could have done alone. The opening of the Rivera Community Arts Center marked a turning point in both their lives. It was more than just a physical space. It was the embodiment of their journey, the culmination of their shared efforts to heal the wounds of the past and build a brighter future. And as Grace and Harrison looked toward the horizon, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, with nothing left unsaid and no more walls between them. Grace and Harrison's journey was one of unexpected connections and profound transformation. What began as a chance encounter at a lavish wedding turned into a deep, life-changing relationship. Despite coming from vastly different worlds, Grace, the humble art teacher, and Harrison, the wealthy CEO, found common ground in their desire to heal old wounds and build a better future. Through their shared efforts to create the Rivera Community Arts Center, they not only mended their personal divide, but also made a lasting impact on their community. This story reminds us that love and redemption are possible even in the most unlikely of circumstances. It teaches us that real change starts with understanding, sincerity, and a willingness to confront the past, no matter how difficult. The lesson here is clear. Our backgrounds and mistakes don't define us. Our actions and choices do. In life, it's never too late to take responsibility, learn, and change. Let's embrace the possibility of growth and reconciliation. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep creating more meaningful content for you. Thank you for being part of this journey.